What's up everybody, I'm back with another tutorial and this time we are learning about Drizzle. If you're new to it, in the next 43 minutes we're gonna learn the most important concepts and also get up to speed so you can use it in your projects. Even though Drizzle hasn't been around for that long, I've built a few projects with it and you can find them on my channel, and so I'm excited to share what I've learned along the way, and let's jump right into the tutorial. We'll get started by creating a simple TypeScript project. I'm gonna create a folder for it, make directory. Let's give it a name, Drizzle tutorial. Once we create it, we cd into it. And here, let's initialize the project. This will create a package.json. So that's the contents of our package.json. And then when we add node modules, the list would show up here, as well as like the scripts that we will configure to run the application. So let's first install the TypeScript and TS node module. So that would be npm I, these are as dependencies, TypeScript, TS node. It's creating a TS config file, and we can do that by the command npx tsc -- init. So it gives us the message, it's created the config file with some of the default configuration, and now we'll create a file where we are going to be writing our code. And as a first line, let's just console log some text. Drizzle is cool, so we're gonna write that into index.ts. And if we run this script right now, we should see this text in our console log. So let's try that. That would be node-loader. We are using the TS node here and index.ts. And we do see this one here. So the script ran successfully. The project that we just created in an IDE. So if you don't have this command code set up, you can just navigate to your IDE and manually look for and then browse to that folder that we created. So we have this open, and we're gonna go ahead to package.json and update this script. We're gonna add here this command, so that next time we just run a start command, this file would automatically start, and we don't have to type this out every single time. So we give a script a name, and then we pass what command it should run. And going to the terminal, now I'm gonna use the terminal of my IDE, so I'm using VS Code, and if I do npm start, it's gonna start the script, and I'm gonna move this up so you guys can see what I'm seeing here. Moving on to setting up Drizzle ORM in our project. So for context, Drizzle could be used with different kinds of databases, for example, MySQL, Postgres, which is what I'm using in this case, and also your database can be hosted using different services, for example, Supabase, Vercel. You can even create one locally and then use that to, add your data and just set up. And the way to do that is first we need to install these dependencies that are shown here. So for this different kinds of databases, the configuration might slightly vary, but for all of them, there's in the beginning, there's a setup instructions. Usually you install dependencies and how you connect to the database. And then after that, queries and other functions for the ORM remain to be the same. So let's go back to this one. We're going to install this. Drizzle ORM package, Postgres, and then Drizzle Kit package. ORM gives us all the functionalities to interact with the database. As for the Drizzle Kit, it's used for different commands like running migrations. And this is the configuration file. I'm gonna paste that. We already have index files, so I'll create a new file. I'll name it db.ts. I'll paste this here. So here they're giving an example of a query, which we don't want in this case. Let's just export default DB instead, and we'll import it into our file, and then we can run the queries. This is just configuration for initializing the DB instance. And if we examine this value right here, that is a database URL, and we have to update that so we have the correct URL. And it starts with the progress. This is the format. So that's like the user of your database. Then it's here we have a port, and I will show two ways of creating a database. One would be local, a database that just lives on your machine. And then another one would be the deployed version. So once again, in both cases, we're going to get the database URL to connect our application to your database. So first, getting started with the local. If you don't want the local version, you can skip this part onto the next one. And for the local, we're going to create a new file inside our folder. We're going to name this docker.compose.yml. And for this, you also do need Docker downloaded. And another thing that I use when working with Docker is Docker extension. That way it's easier to run the command. And this would be the configuration. We are creating a new database, the name of which would be tutorial.db. These are just like variables that you can update. So the username would be Postgres, same with the password, just like kind of following the format that they have here. Instead of that, they have admin. Yeah, so this would be then the port. Also, you'd be running it similar to example here. If we save this and we right click and say compose up, so that should start the processes, and it did create the data folder here with all the information needed to run the database. Okay, and going back to our DB configuration file, let's update the URL. So Postgres username and password. As you can see here, we also have Postgres. So I'm gonna add that and also update here. As for the path, this is the port, and it would be running on localhost. Then finally we have the database name. We named it tutorial.db. Now this value seems to be correct, but let's say if you were to push your project to GitHub for like security reasons so that your database URL is not leaked, it's better to store these sensitive values in .env file and then access them here or other places through environment variables. So let's add a package that's going to help us do so. npm-i.env. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this value, create a new file named .env. So for the value, we're going to name it database URL, and that equals to this. Then at the top, we import .env config. So now we have access to these values using process.env and then the value name. URL. And let's pass those URLs as a string. And as you can see, the migrate folder takes in two functions. So here it's waiting for configuration migrations folder, and we pass the path to the folder, which is going to be inside Drizzle migrations. Let's jump into the part where we host a database using Railway, but if you just want to have on your local machine the database, then you can skip this part and just go to the next one. And the Railway has, I think, the $5 initial, like a trial that give you credits for $5. And once you use that, then you would have to just add credits or subscribe to it. let's go to the dashboard. So I have this one project that I created. So let's create a new one, and we're gonna select a deploy PostgreSQL. So this will create a project it usually takes a few seconds. I will also add the link of the Railway down below. So if you don't have an account, you have to first create one. That it's ready, let's connect to it. So we will get this connection URL that we can just copy. And for this one, you need to create .env file, which I did previously, in the root of the project, and add database URL. So that's the URL for the locally created database. So I'm going to replace that with the database that's on Railway, and let's save this. So this is a password, this is port, also database name, and we have type of the database, username. So once you click copy, you would copy with also this values filled in. So make sure not to do this, instead use this one. And once you have the changes on .env, let's save that. Going back to DB configuration file. So we would have to use that database URL that we saved using environment variables, and the package that we're using to help us with that is .env. So if you don't have that, do npm install .env in your project. So that would install the package. I already installed it in the previous part. So what I did was import this at the top and then replace this hard-coded value that we had in the configuration with the process.env database URL. As for we passed max1, that was indicated in the configuration migrate function, and as a second argument we pass migrations folder. That would be inside Drizzle folder migrations. We pass the path name. We don't need to create a folder. It would automatically save the migrations from the Drizzle inside that folder. And finally export DB that we're later going to use. And yeah, that's about it for the database setup. Next, we need a Drizzle configuration file in which we're also going to use database URL. So I'm going to copy .env import, and this file we're going to create in the root of our project, and it would be drizzle.config.ts. Let's import .env. Also, I'm going to import the type config, which will help us define the configurations, and that would be coming from Drizzle kit. Then we'll create a export default statement that would contain configurations. So we're going to indicate the path for the schema, and let's do that. We'll create a new folder for DB, and that would be schema.ts. We don't have that yet, but that would be our next step. All right, so out is where our migrations go, and as we indicated here, it would be in this path, so that should be matching. Driver PG stands for Postgres, DB credentials, so we pass connection string, and that's the database URL, and finally we pass the type, so this satisfies config. Oh, I'm missing S. All right. Let's save this, a schema file, as we have here, new folder for database, new file schema.ts. And schema basically defines tables and the structure of the database. And inside the table, we define what fields that objects of that table will have, and that would serve as the columns of the table. And since we are using Postgres, the function for defining tables in Postgres that we would use is pgtable, and we import that from Drizzle ORM, and the package would be pgcore. But for different kinds of databases, it would be different naming for the tables. Also, we import things like primary key. Then we also have the types of each column. For example, the type, we can use something like text, we can have integer, serial, boolean, and others. Now let's jump into creating the tables, and first table we'll create, it would be that of, let's give it a name, it would be user, and inside here as a second argument to page-table function is where we define the fields that user is going to have. First one that I usually do for every table is the ID field, and the type of the ID would be text, and we can also define something like make sure that it's never null and set that field as a primary key, so we can always uniquely identify user by their ID. Then we can add some other fields like name. We can do email. Here I'm going to use not null as well. And if we wanted to have something like a timestamp or when email was verified, we can also import that from the module and have the type here. And if we want to pass the mode timestamp, and the mode I'm going to pass, it could be date or a string, but I'll select date. And let's also have an example of a boolean type. Let's say if we have a subscription and user is subscribed, we can add that as true or false, and let's save this. Now let's actually push our changes to the database. We just saved the schema, and to do that we are going to use the command, which is npx drizzle kit, and generate, then we indicate the driver name, which is pg. So once that saves our changes, then let's run a studio, and manually we can browse the tables and also add some data that we are going to later on fetch into our application. So to run the studio, that's npx drizzle kit studio command. That's going to start up studio, and we need to install this package to be able to run the studio, which is what I'm going to do now. So npm ipg. One thing that I missed in the project setup is adding the type of it as a module, so we're able to use the import statements like we're doing now. We're going to open up in the root of our project this tsconfigs, and it did generate all the options that you can uncomment and update the values to. But what I'm going to do is select all this, what we have in compiler options, and paste this value. So defining modules, target, strict type, and a few other things. So we save that. Now to run the migration, actually what I'm going to do is, following this example that we have here, create a new file. I'm going to name it migrate.ts, and I'll open this to the side. So I will include the migrate client code from here in this file, and we can remove this from DB because we won't be needing that here. As for the migrate client, instead of just exporting, we're going to run this migrate file as a function. So I'll define async function main, and inside this async we're going to call this with migrate function with await. Is a function that we're going to call afterwards. We can save this, we can save changes to DB, and to call, run this file, we can use the same way we ran our index file. So that was this command right here. Instead of typing this out every time, we can also make a new script that we can run. So that would be migrate script, and closing. and update the file name, which would be migrate.ts, and that one is also same path in the root of our project. So let's copy this to npm run migrate. So I already did the migration, so I'm getting that it already exists. And to check that your migration worked as expected, we can use the Drizzle Studio. So that would be Drizzle Kit Studio, and it would run this on this path, and we can see, so before in the Postgres I added this table, which I'm going to drop so we can disregard this, but you should be seeing this user table. So if you want to add record, it would be pretty simple. You can do name, and this we can set to true. Oh, it's a date. Okay, let's do null. Save one changes, and I'm surprised that this doesn't automatically get generated. Let's save that. It's the first query, and that is where we're going to use this db file. So for the query, I'm going to go back to index.ts file, and here first we can import db, so we can run the functions on it, and that would be from db. Next thing we need to import is the table that we're running this queries on. So we only have users table. So all right, and removing console log, writing main function. It would be async, and then on await, let's to get all the users. So constant users equals to await db dot. So this is all the functions that we can run. Update, there's select if you want to write row SQL, and there is query dot users find many, and we can console log users. Now if you're seeing this red line for the users, and the error message that it's giving is that the property users doesn't exist. That's because it cannot find users defined on the query because it doesn't know what our schema looks like. So if we in the DB configuration import everything as schema from our schema file, and then in the Drizzle function, we pass that as a second argument. So if we save that, now we can see that the error goes away. Okay, so we call this function. So find many inside here, we can also pass a condition, but let's first just fetch all the users. Create the file extensions. So .ts, okay. Let's run the index file, npm run start. Same thing for the db. And we got an array. Since we only have one user, it returned this one element in the array. And if we were to add, for example, a where condition, we can use different kinds of functions to come up with a condition. So the one that I'll try now is equals function. There's also more, you can check if it's less, and that would be from Drizzle ORM. So we call the equal function, and we first pass what are we checking against. So that would be users.id, and then we pass the value that we're checking it to be. So that would be 2. So since both of this, I'm already importing users, I named this one users, I would call this db users and change that here as well. ID is a string, so we compare that to a string. So we don't have any users with that ID because we only have with one. So if we were to run this again, we'll get an empty array. We just have to run find menu. We can also run find first. That would return the first item that matches whatever condition we have here. So I'm going to change this to 1. and that would be this one item. Create another table, and going back to the schema file here, we are going to add a table for products. Let's say users are selling some products and we need to store that information. So I'll name this products PG table. ID, same for the user. We are going to have type text, and that would be set as a primary key. Let's add also name for the product. And a price, this would be integer. We do have integer imported at the top. Okay, and the next thing that we will create is a relationship. So let's say we only let authorized users be able to post their products that they want to sell, and for each product we need to know which user has created it. So for that we're going to add another field in the products table, which is going to be user ID, and it would be type of text, as we already have user ID as a text. So now this is just a field definition for Drizzle to know that this should actually create a relationship. We're gonna have to create this products relations, and that uses relations function, which if we don't have imported, we can import from, which we don't, from just Drizzle ORM. Call the function and pass the table first according to which we're defining relationships, and then we can have different kinds of relationships. So it could be many to one, many to many, one to one, and to be able to use those, we can pass these values as arguments and define for which tables we have relationships. So the first table that we have is users. So the field would be user coming back, and we only have one product. So each product has only owner one user, and that could be one name of the users table. And then we can define fields. So this would be on products user ID, and references, you would get the ID from users.id. So in the case we're using this, goes here. Okay, so let's define that relationship, but since we have relationship on the product, we have to also define relationship that the users can have many products. So that would go into users relations, and first argument we'll pass users table here. After we want to just take many. And return products. As many, and let's rename this. All right, and let's run migrate, npm run migrate. And we have a product table here. So if we create a new product, let's do sneakers, price. I'm just arbitrarily putting in numbers, and for user ID, it would be 1. Also product ID 1, save one change. If we go to the user now, let's refresh. Okay, I guess we're not able to see the relations here. I think when I'm using usually Supabase over there, I can see if there's another column that shows relationships. But what we can do now is go back to our index file and fetch an user with the product. So if we just were to do this, you're going to see that the product, even though a user has one, does not come back as a part of the response. That's because it's a relationship and it comes from a different table. Do with and then indicate the relationship field name. So product, set that to true. We are also going to see product details. And here's an array of all the products that the user has. Let's add another table for the orders. This would be when users purchase the product and store information related to that. So the table name orders pg table order, and I will copy the ID. We also need to create for keeping things simple, let's have a one product per order and relationship between the order and the product. So let's add product ID. And this would be text product ID. We can also do quantity, and that would be integer. Finally, user ID. So this would be the ID of the user that purchased the product. For example, okay. Moving on to the order relations, export constant relations, orders. We're gonna have many, actually just maybe one. So product one. From products table, as for the fields, it would be orders product ID. And we're referencing products.id on that one, and same thing for the user. Orders, this would update with user ID and users.id. So then adding in the products, the orders of that product, that would be many orders. And the users can also have many orders. Okay, let's push our changes. Let's do npx drizzle kit generate pg. From the studio, let's go and do it using the insert function. And the way it works is we run it on the DB. So I'm gonna remove that and I'll name this inserted order. Let's do user first. Inserted user ID, and we call insert function. We pass users table, and then we pass the values. So that would be all of the values the user had. So ID should be automatically generated. We can pass a name. Then we have, and we can see the types here, ID, and then like email is, I believe, required type. That's why we're getting an error. And the great thing about Drizzle is that you can also, before you pass the types to your function, you can also define the types, and using the infer function, you can infer the types from the schema. And yeah, I think that's really cool. And if you want to check out how to do that, I have more tutorials on my channel where I build like full stack projects using Drizzle. So make sure to check that out. Let's return, from here we can return a value. Let's say we don't need the whole user object, we just need the ID of newly inserted user. We can say inserted ID, and that would be users.id. And so usually the ID that I've used in previous versions is automatically generated, but maybe we have to update the schema. Even though I did use the text ID, I don't know why it's not happening in this case, but we can always add like a default function for it to automatically handle it. So if we run this right now, so we should get that it was inserted and then the same ID that we have generated using it. And let's insert an order from that user. We need to import orders table, return that value, and as for the order, this would be 1. This would go in orders table. We have a quantity. Let's do 2. Then a product ID. We only have one product, so I'm gonna add that user ID. So that would be the user that purchased it. So 3, and we're gonna return this order ID. And let's run this again. Okay, we get back the ID. It's to get all the orders that were placed against the products that user has posted to sell. We won't be able to do just by calling the users table, because as you can see, there's no direct relationship between the users table if you look at the users relations and the orders that was placed on the products by users. So the orders that you see here is the purchases that user made. But what about all the products that users sold? How can we get that information? And here enters joins. Using joins, if you're familiar with SQL concept of there's different kinds of joins, inner, outer, and that enables us to kind of combine the tables and pick the data based on the condition that we pass. It's going to return the rows from multiple tables. That way we can cross-reference data from different places. And for getting, let's say, how many orders did the user sell, or how many times did the user sell the products, we can use inner join for that. So I'm gonna remove this function and orders await DB. Here we're using select, and we can just get all the data, or we can indicate what we want to return. Let's say we want as a value to have a count, and count is a function. It will just count the results, so we can import that from Drizzle ORM, and I'll return this. The next step is indicating from which table, so that would be from users table. And we would do an inner join. So first we pass the products, and then here we need equal statement. So we're gonna get all the products that user is selling, and that would be products that user ID. So making sure that the user ID of the products matches user's ID. Or we can indicate a value for like a specific user, for example, the first user, and we need to import the products table. Next, we're gonna do another inner join. This time it would be on the orders table. So actually, so now this we will leave as user's ID, and we'll add the where condition in the end. So here, orders, so that should match our products IDs, and that equals to products that order ID. Not the order ID, would match it against products ID equals to orders that product ID. Okay, and then finally the where condition, and we only do this for one user, so that would be users.id. That equals to 1, and missing the closing parenthesis. Okay. And then we don't need the returning statement since we already have a select, and it's going to return a value that would have the value of it stored. Okay, let's run this, and we haven't had any orders. Oh, we did create one order, so it should be value 1. Perfect. So that would be it for tutorial. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Drizzle provides a lot of different functions, and there's many things you can do with it, even write row SQL inside your code. And if you're looking to build a project with like web application with Drizzle, I have a few different tutorials that I'm gonna link. You can see at the top right corner of the video and also in the description. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.